Hello, and welcome to Transcend, the podcast that opens minds, expands consciousness, and raises vibration. I'm your host, Jami Christine, and I hope this show brings a little more enlightenment into your life. Hello, welcome to Transcend, and today we've got Andrae Smith Jr. with us. Hi, Andrae.
Hi, Jamie. Thank you so much for having me on here.
We have been talking about doing this for a while, and I have been really excited to have you as a guest for a while, just because all of our conversations have been awesome. We probably should have just recorded all of them all along, but today we're finally going to have one to share. So
Absolutely.
can you introduce yourself for us?
Sure. So I am an author, an editor, writing coach. I've had the pleasure of working with you on your most recent book, Transcend Your Story, which is just
Yeah.
absolutely amazing. Before that, I'd written my own book, Facing Racism, which came up almost out of nowhere for me. And I think that's really important to bring up because I think today we'll be talking a bit more about the universing, and that's definitely an instance where the universe was like, "Hey, you're doing this," because that's something I never planned on doing. At least that particular book, I was going the entirely opposite direction, and poof, there it came out. So here we go. Anyway, I'm
That's
super
awesome.
excited because it's all about growth. I'm all about personal transformation. I've had a blog on personal transformation before, and I've got some new book ideas that might come up that'll be really interesting in the area of personal development and spiritual growth. So I'm super excited to be here and just grateful to dive right in.
Yay, that's awesome. Because, yeah, I'm all about personal development and spiritual growth as well. And yes, the universe is always universing. And let's dive into talking more about how facing racism wasn't something that you planned on doing, because I love that story.
Ah, yes. So as you know, I think I've told you before, my background is in fiction writing. As a young child, I got into reading fiction because I really needed a bit of an escape from reality. I didn't have a lot of friends. I was very socially awkward, very shy, and because I had a small speech impediment, I struggled with reading aloud and kind of speaking with people on the spot. So making friends was difficult, and because of the lack of kind of reinforcements of my own identity and positive words being spoken around me, I didn't really have a strong sense of self or identity. So I was very insecure. Um, at about third grade, I was introduced to some new books, and I really just fell in love with the feeling of reading, immersing myself in totally other worlds, other planets, other kingdoms, other nations, anywhere that wasn't where I actually was. Like, and of course, it was the big one was Harry Potter that just sucked me straight out of this world and into a place
Yeah.
where it's like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Can I actually go here? And so I developed a love for writing as well. I always loved telling stories, and I always thought I would become the next great American novelist. It was really that was the goal, and that's why I spent a lot of time developing my fiction writing skills, honing my craft, and even throughout high school, working towards a novel. I think I wrote some 80 or 90,000 words of a novel before I realized, I think this one's done. It's not going to get any better. I can't go back and refine it. It's fundamentally flawed. When you get good enough and you realize there's no saving this project, I got to move on.
Uh,
So I
yep, I know
always
that
thought,
feeling.
yep, yep. And I always thought that I would pick up from there, and the first book that I would publish would be the new novel. Lo and behold, I ended up in this nonfiction space, and after the death of George Floyd and all of the conflict around that, I found myself in all these conversations online and in person around racism and anti-racism, social justice, and all of this. And what ended up happening was I was like, I could write a whole book on this. I'm like, don't get any ideas. At that time, I was working at a publishing company, and helping people to develop and write books quickly was what I was doing. So I knew all the steps. I knew the whole process. I knew how long it would take me. I'm like, don't do this to me, universe. I'm not trying to write this book. I do not want to be an anti-racism expert. I don't want to be in this space. But the idea just didn't leave me. It wouldn't let me go. And so I talked with one of my coworkers, and she's like, "Hey, yeah, you should totally do that. You'd write a great book on it." I'm like, "I was hoping you would tell me no, like don't do it." And she's like, "Oh yeah, no, you should totally do it." I'm like, "Oh man," but I still didn't do it. It took me another week before I finally was like, "Okay, maybe I'll just give it a shot. I'll do the planning and development and see if I really feel called towards it." A few hours later, it was a Saturday, and I did the pre-work for it, did all the planning, and ultimately I was like, well, there's the book. I guess I'll start writing. And a week later, the book was done, and I submitted it to some of my peers, and we worked on editing and finding and getting it published. And I was like, oh my god, I wrote this nonfiction book on social justice and anti-racism, which is exactly the opposite of where I wanted to go. But it was a true testament to, it wasn't my plan, but the universe had a higher purpose.
Yes, as it always does. I am curious though, why did you feel like you didn't want to speak on anti-racism?
Because I never liked anything political. I didn't even bother watching the news most of the time. Anything that had to do with the real world and politics, I didn't want to deal with it. But especially the area of racism and social justice, partly because of my experience as an African American man, you know, having to live with some of this stuff. I
Mm-hmm.
didn't want to really re-immerse myself in it. And like growing up, like I never really liked Black History Month or like Martin Luther King Day because it always felt so strange and awkward. Like we would always go over the same stuff. Okay, yeah, slavery happened, and then there was this, and then there was that, and here's Dr. King and Malcolm X and the Black Panther Party, but we don't talk about them. We don't talk about Bruno. And so it just always felt so weird and cringy and made me feel like instead of empowered, I felt weird and kind of belittled. And so
Mm,
when the time came, it was like, I really don't want to touch any of this stuff because it sucks.
yeah.
I want to hear stories and write stories about, you know, people who can actually make a difference, people who can take on the challenge and it actually works and we don't have to deal with all the extra political BS. And I know some people are like, the fiction stories that are closest to reality are always the most interesting. But I'm like, they can be, but also like I don't really feel like dealing with that right now. And also, when you write a book, people start to look at you, especially in the nonfiction space, they look at you like an expert. And I
Hmm.
didn't want to brand myself as someone who was going to be going around doing talks and trainings on diversity, equity, and inclusion and anti-racism and social justice. Like, I'm a writer. I didn't even like people enough to want to be out and around people, let alone giving talks and uh, trainings and things like that.
Yeah. And have you been doing, have you, because you've done a few talks on this topic before, right?
Yes, that's exactly what happened. I wrote the book, and people invited me to speak and teach and train and ask for advice. And now, a year later, I'm getting ready to launch the second edition later this year, as well as I've been working with a lot of social justice authors, and I'm on the diversity, equity, and inclusion panel for Brains Magazine. So I write articles about this stuff, and I talk about it on a regular basis. So it's like yeah, the universe definitely was like, yeah, this is where you're going, buddy.
Oh, isn't that funny?
It really is.
Yeah. So, yeah, do you want to keep talking more about that, or do we want to switch gears into more of the writing space, or do we want to talk more about the universing?
Listen, I can go in any direction because they all really tie in. You know, this is one aspect of the writing, which is also one aspect of the universing. It to me, it just shows just another example of how we hold on to certain expectations. We set our sights on a vision of what we think our life should look like, whether it's
Mm-hmm.
conditioned into us or whether we are reacting to what was conditioned and we think I'm gonna create something entirely different because this is the life I envision now because I'm free from all the indoctrination. But even then, when your eyes are opened, it takes another level to go from hey, I'm no longer doing what society wanted for me. I'm gonna do what I want to do to what I want to do is gonna align with what the universe has for me. That's that next level of surrender that most people are like, I don't know if I want to do that. Like I want to do this. Like, can I just do this thing? And you're just like, yeah, sure, but like you got to go this way, and it's like, no, I want to go this way.
Yeah, I can totally relate to that. I feel like my whole life, or at least the past 15 years of my life, has been more or less like that. From getting married when I never believed in getting married, because I just felt like that wasn't an institution I wanted to buy into. And I did. I had kids before I was really mentally ready to have kids, because that's just
Hmm.
what you do, because you get married and then you have the babies. So I followed all the steps. And it's like, man, I look back and it's like, no wonder I was so unhappy. Like I was battling depression all the time. It's like I was not on the path I was supposed to be on. And yeah, getting a divorce was definitely an unconventional route to take because so many people are like, oh, you made this commitment. You have to stick with this commitment. And I'm like, but I want to commit to my happiness. Like I want to commit to the rest of my life being in alignment with what's right for me. And this isn't working anymore. And
Mm-hmm.
then, yeah, I feel like just us coming together, me and you, with writing Transcend Your Story. I remember that moment when you're like, have you ever considered writing a nonfiction? And I was like, no. But the more we get to talking, it's like, wow, I guess I do have the content to share. So like I have the insight that I could share with people who may be on a similar journey as me when it comes to writing fiction. Because yeah, I'm a fiction writer too, still working on honing my skills on that, but I do feel I've got several stories in me that are good and worth sharing and could really make a positive impact on the world. But the majority of where these stories are coming from are based on my own healing journey. And
Mm-hmm.
so, yeah, when we got to talking, it's like, oh my gosh, I've got the knowledge on how to guide other people who have been on healing journeys into the process or through the process of writing their own fiction novel based on that. And yeah, that's kind of a really cool little niche. So Transcend Your Story exists now because of the universing. Hey, there
And I
it
keep it close by. You know, it's funny. I'm
is.
in transition. I'm in my aunt and uncle's house today, but it's funny. Like I have your book like right here anyway,
It
like
follows
as if I
you.
was at my own desk.
Aw,
And
I'm honored.
you should be. And this is a great book, and I've actually been talking about it a lot more, which is why I was at the top of the book stack recently.
That's
Um,
cool.
because I've been talking with a lot of people who really are in a space where they want to utilize their story, and they haven't decided whether or not they want to tell their story in a fiction space or in a memoir or use it in sort of a self help sort of space. And I'm like, well, hey, if you want to do a fiction work, a novel, there's one book I can definitely recommend right off the bat. Start here. Start here.
Aw,
And
that's awesome.
I think a couple of people have opened up the link and should be buying soon if they haven't yet.
Yay. Well,
Not to
thank
turn this
you.
whole podcast into a promo, but I really do truly believe that what you've shared and the way that you've shared it is so valuable because um, shameless plug here as your editor for this project, I'm really excited about the fact that what you put into this book, it goes beyond, hey, here's how you write a novel. Like, no, this is here's how you look at your life, your story, the things that are important to you, the lessons that you've learned, and start to recontextualize them and rebuild the narrative or even build a new narrative around those lessons. There are times when, as you mentioned, we don't necessarily want to retouch the events that happened,
Hmm.
but we can never let go of the valuable lessons that came up. And you give your readers permission to do that and a pathway to find their own story.
Yes, you said that so perfectly. It's something I've been thinking about a lot too, the difference between writing your story as a fiction or writing it as a memoir or writing it as a nonfiction. And what I really like about fiction and telling your story that way is that yeah, you can touch on painful subjects because I think like especially in the world nowadays, people's emotions are so heightened to the point
Ooh.
where they are fixated on one idea where they're angry. They're just everyone's so angry. And that anger
Mm-hmm.
has got them in such this headspace that it's almost like they're tuning everything else out. That, somebody with a differing perspective from you or a differing belief may actually have something valuable to say that could impact you in a positive way if you just get out of your anger and listen.
Oh,
Like
that's
you
such a
don't
huge point.
have, yeah, you don't have to agree with everybody, but just listen. Like maybe you'll come across an opportunity to see things through a different light. And yeah, I don't want to get too political either, but oh my gosh, as a female, there's some things going on too that I'm sure correlate to things that you've had to experience years ago. It's like we all have these injustices and discriminations and different things that we all have to battle. And it's like you get up on a soapbox and you try to preach and you share the memes on Facebook that make really great points that you're just preaching to your choir basically, but you're never reaching the people who you want to reach so that you can share your perspective with the people who don't readily agree with you right away because they're all in their heightened state of emotions. With fiction though, you can tell the story through a character who is experiencing this thing firsthand and
Mm-hmm.
is going through the emotional journey and is processing it in the way that you may have processed it, or in the way that somebody else had processed it. And as a reader,
Mm-hmm.
you get to go along on that journey and look at a situation through new eyes or through a different perspective and think, this actually isn't what I thought before, but it's a different way of looking at it that I guess could work. You start like emotionally relating to the character. And then as the character resolves what they're going through, you're going along on the journey with them, and you're getting to see
Mm-hmm.
how they're processing and how they're resolving what they're experiencing. And I mean, for me as a writer too, it's like I got to relive a lot of really painful emotions, because my book is based on a traumatic birth experience that I had. I was like, I don't want to write about a traumatic birth. I don't want to touch the hospital. I don't want to touch anything to do with babies in this book, like pregnancy. No, I don't talk about it. But at the same time too, it's like, man, I did a lot of like growth through accepting what happened and moving forward as a better person because of it. And
Mm-hmm.
I took that experience and transformed it into a different type of journey. And as a reader, you get to go along on the journey of like, oh my gosh, this guy's life got turned upside down. Like, how is he going to deal with this? And how is he going to grow from it? And yeah, I got to tell my story of how I grew from it through somebody else's eyes.
Yeah, and you bring up a lot of great points here. For the first thing, we we don't listen enough to each other. And like you said, we don't always have to agree, but at the end of the day, in our disagreements, we can still be learning because
Mm-hmm.
sometimes we're wrong. Sometimes, no matter how well thought out, how methodical, how planned out it is, how justified we think we don't have the full picture, or what we're saying just isn't quite complete, or it just doesn't work. And that's one of the things that goes back to, sometimes you want to go one way, and the universe is like, yeah, but I have this totally other path for you, and we get so fixated on trying to do it the way that we've envisioned, but we're not focusing enough, or focusing too much on that piece, that we're missing the big picture. The way I think about it is sometimes, think of it like this: you're on a path, and you want to stay on this path, but in the middle of this path, you come to a boulder. It's not moving. It's way too large. You're not going to get it anywhere. So you have a choice. You can, at least in your mind, you can turn back, or you can find a way to move or break down this boulder. Those are the two options. You try as hard as you can to beat and push and shove this boulder, and all this time you're putting in all this energy and effort. What you don't realize is directly to your left, if you're willing to step off the path you've set yourself on, there's a small little crevice that you could take that leads you right around the boulder. It's a side stop, but it takes you exactly where you want to go, and you might find something else along the way. But you're so focused on doing it your way that you miss that. And we do the same thing when it comes to political issues, when it comes to our own opinions, when it comes to relating to people, that we really need new ways of being pulled out of our own perspective, because we're only looking one way. We got tunnel vision to
Mm-hmm.
see the rest of the world around us, and that's where fiction kind of really just kind of takes the cake over nonfiction, because in a lot of nonfiction, it's so direct that people who don't want to read it flat out will never pick it up. You could say this is a story uh, uh, um, about a Native American woman and how she survived going through the boarding schools and this and this and this. And people who don't want to read that are never going to pick it up. Now you create a fictionalized novel, same concept, same material, same stuff going on, but it's reframed as a story of adventure and survival and growth through difficult times. You know, oh wow, now that's a bit easier to take in
Mm-hmm.
because people are so much more open to it. And so I think there's so much there, so much there. The other point that you brought up, and I know I'm going like way in, but like
Let's
it
go
kind
in.
of opens up the idea that more of the idea that the universe is always universing. We always have this idea that things are going to go a certain way, but the universe loves to give us new opportunities to grow and stretch and see new perspective. And a lot of times our new levels, our next levels, our growth and our purpose alignments don't really come the way that we think that they should, but usually from the exact opposite from things that we've been trying to avoid, run from, or just it feels like we're being blindsided. You have that feeling like it just feels like you're being blindsided, only to be like, well, shoot, this is exactly where I was. Universe, you could have done this some other way.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what my son's birth was. Like, I use the word blindsided, and I use the word or the term that the rug got pulled out from under me. It's like, whoosh, I had nothing to stand on anymore. And I just fell over. And it's so true though, because I remember before having kids, I was really into like spirituality in a more alternative way. Having grown up Catholic, I was like, I feel like there's more. I just feel like there's more to life than what my church and the Bible and everything my culture taught me. And I went on a quest to find that. And, of course, you find all these gurus that reach nirvana. And I'm like, what is nirvana? I want to know what that is. What's enlightenment? What does that mean? And you think it's this like happy rainbows and like butterflies feeling. And I always like wondered, like, will I ever achieve some sort of enlightenment? And then whoosh, let's pull the rug out from under Jami and have everything that she ever hoped and dreamed for her child entering into the world be the exact opposite of what she built it up to be. And then I was like, I don't know, it's like I lost all my faith in the universe, that there's no such thing as law of attraction, there's no such thing as power of positive thinking, and all these other things that I had built myself up on. And I had to like reconfigure my entire foundation. And it was this whole growth process of doing that led me to my own personal sense of what I feel is enlightenment. Like I feel a million times more. I'm not saying like I'm this enlightened person, but I am far more than where I was 12 years ago. And I was like,
So
I sat back and I thought about it. I'm like, oh my gosh, this new perspective that I have is actually the perspective I wanted prior to this. Like, did we have to go about it that way though? But hey, here I
right.
am.
So you bring up another great point about enlightenment. So how would you define enlightenment now?
Oh gosh, how do I put words into that? I feel like enlightenment is like a personal thing, but I also feel like it's synonymous with emotional freedom. And emotional freedom to
Mm,
me is where you're not so stuck on this one way of doing things. Like you were saying about the boulders, like you're so fixated on the way that you think things need to be done that you miss all the other little paths and journeys and opportunities that are around the boulder if you just step back and look for it. And I feel like emotional freedom is that. It's like you let go of judgments, you let go of expectations, and you're open to all possibilities that life throws at you with the awareness that you're going in the right direction no matter what, and everything is going to work out no matter what. And it's all
mm-hmm.
for your highest good. I look at all challenges that way now. Like I feel like it's increased my sense of optimism. So when something bad happens or something challenging happens, whether it's on a personal level or a big global political level, I can look at it and be like, oh my gosh, what kind of growth am I going to get from this? What kind of powerful life lesson am I going to get from this? What kind of a positive person am I going to become because of this? And that's my
Mm-hmm.
first and automatic thought anytime something challenging is thrown at me. It's like, it's not like I don't suffer a little bit. Challenges still are hard and they're still painful. And that's a whole other topic that you and I can dive into, is that sometimes things are just hard. But it's at the same time too, when things are hard, I'm able to look at them as it's growth. It's going to be good. Something good is coming from this. And that's what I feel enlightenment is just to view the world from that perspective and just enjoy the journey.
I like that, and I think there's a lot of different ideas. I won't even say misconceptions. I'll just say differing ideas on what enlightenment is and looks like. And I think most of society kind of sees it as this kind of achieved state where like in ultimate peace, and you're walking around with this just glow over your eyes and like a living walking Buddha. But as I've studied more and learned more, I get the personal sense that enlightenment is not a thing to achieve or a destination of any sort to where you are now free from samsara and whatnot. You know, enlightenment really, as I've started to think about it, is more like just the
Mm-hmm.
beginning of the escape from the wheel of life and reincarnation, where you start to really see what life is about. Um, I look at life now as, and I learned this sort of from Taoism, as kind of like the flow. Like life is the flow. You've got the Tao, which is the flow of life. And if you think of it like a river, if you zoom in to any single drop or collection of drops, it's gonna look pretty chaotic. You're sloshing around all over the place. Like, what the heck's happening here? I'm here and I'm being sloshed over there. I'm hitting against some rocks. Like, what the heck, man? When you pull out and look far enough, like it actually just looks very calm and it's just going and following a track. So really, when I think about enlightenment, it's recognizing that both realities are true at the same time. Where it's like it's both calm and chaotic at the same time. Like both exist together, and when you're going through life, you're gonna feel some of the chaos. Like you don't not feel it, but also you're going to be able to feel the peace and recognizing that you are both the flow and the drop at the same time. And that in itself isn't necessarily a solution to the problems, but a way in which to view life that allows you to experience the problems differently and not get so hung up on sloshing around into the chaos. Have you ever read Siddhartha by Herman Hesse?
Yes, I have. That was yeah, gosh, I think I read that back in high school and it was just eye-opening, mind-blowing, life-changing for me.
I love, love, love that book, and especially Siddhartha's Real Awakening. Spoiler alert
Mhm.
slash no spoilers. It's just such a brilliant experience to see how he has to live in order to find what he's looking for. So he spends his whole life searching and searching and even resisting teachers. He's like, I don't think you're the right teacher for me, and I don't think anyone's going to be able to teach me. And then finally, he's like, I've had to live. I've just had to live.
Yes. Yes, and that actually comes full circle back to the power of fiction because Siddhartha's story was told in the form of fiction. You got to go on the journey with him.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of like getting up in your face and saying, "Hey, you got to live life," and explaining it as a nonfiction form of just information thrown at you, instead, you're journeying with him to learn these experiences and come to this conclusion in the end. And just having been on that journey with him up into this point of realization, you get to realize it all with him. Like, oh, I do have to live.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the thing that we all miss is that we're so busy seeking and thinking that something's to be different or has to look a certain way that we really miss it. So like I was actually talking recently with someone about the law of attraction and manifestation and all of that. And um really it kind of touches again on what I mentioned earlier was like, okay, there's society's conditioning, then there's you breaking free and what you envision for life, and then there's that surrender. Most people who are trying to manifest and really kind of make use of the law of attraction as it's kind of taught socially now, since it's all socially acceptable and not hidden anymore,
Mm-hmm.
they're all in this space. It's like, oh, this is what I want. I'm gonna go and create it. I'm gonna go and manifest. I'm gonna call it to me. I'm gonna do all this work. I'm gonna do all the internal clearing because this is what you have to do. You have to do this. You have to do that. And it's very like masculine, aggressive, and also very Western. And a lot of magical systems are all about creating and manipulating, really. Um, Another example of it being, like Star Wars, the Force, the dark side of the Force, dark side users are really very much, you know, on the alchemy side of things. Are like, I want to create this. I'm going to manipulate the Force and the energy to do what I want to do with life. But then on the light side of the Force, what people don't really talk about a whole lot is like their mentality is very Eastern. It's like, hey, be used by the Force, surrender to the will of the Force as it is. Then, of course, there's the Gray Jedi who realize, you get to do both. You don't have to kind
Mm.
of be one or the other. Like the Force also has this thing where it's like it's both light and dark, and it will do either. They're not in competition. It's the same Force.
It's the same thing. Yeah,
um,
exactly.
but in life, we think about manifesting and trying to create so much that what you actually have to do really isn't even anything that you have to do. You just stop being in your own way. Stop trying
Mm-hmm.
to create more and just start to be. And you realize if you surrender to your kind of higher will, that there's already a path for you. All the things that you are desiring from truly within your heart that you really want was already known before you got here and has been prepared ever since. And all you're doing is pulling things out of the way to allow yourself to receive it. And when you can do that, you don't have to do the magics. You don't have to do the summonings, the rituals, the spiritual circles, and have everyone put tokens in a jar for you, and then go bury the jar under a tree in a field 3 miles down the road so that no one ever finds it and picks it up. All that type of stuff. Like, no, like you just say, yeah, I'm grateful for this, and I'm grateful for what I have, and universe, whatever you've got for me today, I love it. I know you'll meet my needs. And before you know it,
Mm,
things come through. It's like, oh,
yes.
you get random checks in the mail. It's like, oh, I didn't even know I had an account with this person, but okay, thank you. I appreciate that. Oh,
Yeah, and
I need a new
that's
friend.
exactly it.
Cool. I didn't know I needed a new friend, but I like this person.
And that's exactly how it goes. Like yeah, that's exactly how you and I came into each other's lives. I was having issues formatting my cover, and I posted it in this writers group, and you're like, hey, I think I can help with that. And you helped me. And then it was just like this communication after that, this connection that happened that led to all of a sudden I'm writing a nonfiction and publishing it. And it's like, oh my gosh, the universe just universed through me to just happen to ask for help, and you happen to see it and happen to respond, and then poof, new friend. And yeah, it's just amazing how everything can flow if you just go with that flow and just surrender to it. And it made me think about yeah, back to my birth experience. It's like I was trying to use the law of attraction to manifest this idea of what I wanted. I was terrified of the hospital. I didn't want anything to do with it. Babies, hospitals for sick and injured people. And having a baby is not a sickness or an injury. It's just a natural process. So I wanted to do it at home. And I was like manifesting, and I was using the law of attraction, and I was thinking all these things about this, just using the power of positive thinking to make sure that this happened at home. And everything that could go wrong went wrong. And yeah, the hospital definitely was needed, and off I went. And I was just so angry about it. Like, no, universe, this isn't what I asked you for. Why are you totally ignoring everything that I just said? And it's like I didn't get out of my own way to think like maybe this is supposed to be happening for me. And that's exactly what I learned then. And that is part of my definition of enlightenment, is realizing like just go with the flow. The universe has a plan for you. You have a predetermined path. Let it all unfold, and everything that you need is going to continue to come to you and happen in
Hmm.
perfect timing. And when bad things happen, they're just part of that. They're part of the experience. Like sometimes things are just hard. And it's all about your perspective of how you look at it to either grow from it or get crushed by it. It's up to you. And I saw that then when I had a stroke in 2019, just a freak accident, crazy thing that happened. Um, and I was off to the hospital again. In fact, the same one I had Harley in. And here I go. And I'm like, okay, I'm going back, but I'm not going to have the same experience. I don't know why this is happening. And obviously I don't want this. This is not what I asked for. I know who would ask for something like this, but okay, it's happening. I have to accept that it's happening. And I'm just going to trust that it's happening for a good and positive reason. And I am
Hmm.
going to come out of this in a good and positive way. And I did. And honestly, I think it's just the simplicity of realizing that is the reason it happened. I really don't know why else it happened. I have no residual effects from it. My mind reached a really cool state of silence that I've never experienced before, because it took everything in my power just to stand upright. So I had no room for thoughts or anything. And I'm like, wow, is this what it's like to find inner peace? Like my brain is quiet. Nothing's talking to me up in here. So that was cool too. But yeah, it was just a new perspective, and I got through it because I got out of my own way.
That is amazing, and I love that you tell that story as well, because we it shows the growth and your change in perspective. It's almost like, you in life there are, I want to say there are no lessons, only tests,
Mm.
because really the test is the lesson. And so you get tested, and then you learn after the test that that was the lesson, and then you get retested on it later to find out if you learned the lesson from the first test.
Yep, that sounds about right.
And this shows like, this was your second test. Did you learn? did you learn from the first one, or do I have to like make the third test even harder?
Exactly. And I don't really want it to be harder, so I was like, yeah, I'm gonna make sure I learned. And I think I
Mm-hmm.
did.
It's funny, like I talk about sometimes my experience after um, my 2018 relationship, and some of the things that happened around that. And afterwards, I was talking with my aunt, who was at the time a medium with the Akashic records, and so I was
Cool.
talking with the records through her, and I was like, "Why did this happen? Why? What am I supposed to be learning from this? Like, where do I go from here?" And they pretty much said, you have some stuff that you're working through, some things that need to be resolved within you, some things that need to be resolved within your life's mission, your soul purpose. Um, and one of the reasons that you keep manifesting these type of people is that you are still dealing with this stuff, like a lot of stuff, like with my own mom. Um, so part of my soul's mission was to try to help heal her,
Mm.
and I still haven't quite figured out exactly how to do that. Parents are tricky like that. But what they said is, because of this mission that hasn't been accomplished yet, you've been trying to recreate it in your partners. I'm like, this is awful. And they're like, and if you don't solve this and a couple of these other things, like you're going to repeat it again within a year and it'll be worse. I'm like, ah!
Yeah, no, don't want that.
I almost had a heart attack, but I'm like, I'm glad they were so explicit. Like, within a year, it'll be worse. Okay, cool. So I was very intentional about doing everything I could to grow and learn important lessons from that. Like, we don't always get that type of direct clarity with life, but when you do, like, you better take heed and
Sure,
listen.
listen.
And
Yeah.
you mentioned a couple of things I want to dive into. I don't know how much time we have, but I
Hey,
know
well, let's just keep talking.
I love it. Um, you mentioned earlier our previous conversation around, things sometimes just being hard. And I want to dive in there, but you also
Mhm.
touched on, we both kind of touched on this idea of having a set path that I would love to spend a little bit of time with as well, you know, because I think a lot of people really resist the idea of things being predestined, this concept of
Mhm.
predestination, because we really like the idea of free will. And I would love to know your personal thoughts on this predestined sort of path. Like, what is destiny, and what is this path in your mind? I have my own ideas, but I love your perspective.
Yeah, and I can't wait to hear your ideas because, and I love that you asked that because I like, who is the host right now? This is fun. That was actually something I really struggled with. So after my son was born, and I thought I was manifesting what I wanted, and then I didn't get what I thought I wanted. I got what I needed, but I didn't know that at the time. So I was faced with this big question of fate versus free will. Like, what is it? Is
Mm-hmm.
like, what are we doing here? Are we just robots that are supposed to follow this predetermined path, and we really don't have free will, but just the illusion of it? Or do we have free will and nothing's predetermined and we create everything well, that's not true because I didn't create what I just wanted. So now I'm confused. And I
Mm-hmm.
tried asking my counselor about that, and she's like, you can't be asking existential questions like that, Jami. And I'm like, that's what my church told me a long time ago. So I'm going to go somewhere else because I don't like that answer. I like to ask questions. So I moved on to a different counselor, and she kind of guided me through this more like spiritual journey where I figured out the answer to that question on my own. And when I say that, I just mean this is the answer that works for me. I don't know if
Mm-hmm.
this is the answer for everybody because everybody's got a different perspective on their journey. But I believe that it's both, kind of like the gray Jedi, like you said. You got to use both. Both things are happening at the same time. You can have chaos and calm within the same space. So that's the same thing with fate versus free will. I really do believe that there are certain things kind of set along our path for us because I actually believe in soul contracts. So for
Mm-hmm.
anybody that wants to know more about soul contracts, Carolyn Mace, that's spelled Myss, she's got an amazing book on that, Sacred Contracts. But anyway, my belief is that there are things that we need to learn to evolve as souls and to grow. And there are certain ways to have those experiences. So, for instance,
Mm-hmm.
if forgiveness is a lesson that I need to learn in this lifetime, I kind of need somebody or something to forgive, which means something not so fun is going to happen that is going to cause me to hold a grudge or regrets or whatever that I'm going to eventually have to learn how to forgive. And then poof, I've learned my lesson of forgiveness. And you need people to come in and interact with you on that level to teach you those lessons. And we are both the teachers and the students. I have definitely caused people pain in this lifetime that I wish I hadn't, but things just happen. And it's like, I have to accept the fact that my role was the teacher in that moment. And I have to trust that the student in that moment learned what they were supposed to learn so that they could grow. And I believe that we interact with each other on those levels. And then situations interact with us on those levels. So I believe that Harley and I had a soul contract that, like, hey, Mom, I know that you want it to go this way, but I'm just going to get stuck and it's not going to go this way because you got something to learn. And
Okay.
and I didn't know that that's what I needed at the time. Where free will comes in is I was a hot mess of depression and PTSD and just yuck at that time in my life after my son was born. I was choosing to be angry at the universe, and I was choosing to just be crushed by the weight of everything that just happened, by the misfortune of it all. And then finally I made the choice to say, I don't want to live like this anymore. This is not fun. I'm not a good mother because I'm just a mess. He deserves better. My friends deserve better. The people that are important to me deserve better of me, and I deserve better of me. I got to figure out how to climb up out of this. And I chose to start growing, and I chose to get help, and I chose to move up and out of it and see things through a new perspective. So I believe that that birth experience was fate. It was predestined. It was supposed to happen. My free will was how I chose to respond to it. And then when I had that stroke, that was fate. I was supposed to have that experience. I could have chosen to freak out, like, oh my gosh, I'm never going to be able to use the right side of my body again. I'm never going to be able to run a marathon again. Oh my gosh. Or I could have said, this is happening for a reason. I don't know what it is, but I'm going to trust that it's good, and I'm going to go with the flow. And I ended up having kind of a good time in the hospital because I got really cool nurses who were fun, and we joked with each other. And I don't know, it was just a really positive experience that could have been the exact opposite if I were upset and angry about it. So my choice on how I respond to the fated situation is what my free will is. And that's how I believe that works.
I love that, and I have my own thoughts that I'll share in a moment. But I'm curious now. Also, sorry, stealing the host role again. Do you
No, do
ever
it.
feel
It was
like
cool.
do you ever feel like you are kind of gaslighting yourself emotionally? Like if you're always, looking for the positive and the lessons and the growth, do you ever feel like you don't allow space for any of your negative emotions to kind of flow?
Ooh, that's a really good question. So I guess that's a very possible thing to have happen. And I think it is important to feel your feelings, good
Mm-hmm.
and bad.
Mm-hmm.
So that actually is something I experienced after the stroke too. It's like, okay, this isn't going to be all sunshine and rainbows. Like, I don't know what the future holds. And it was a day, the first night I spent home from the hospital, I just stayed at my boyfriend's house because I still couldn't walk by myself. So I needed somebody to help me. And I remember, like, I couldn't get comfortable because my neck still hurt really bad. And I was scared, like, to do anything that would, like, put it in an awkward situation and, like, trip the cosmic switch that I'm going to wind up back in the hospital again. It was just a really scary moment. And I still couldn't walk straight. I couldn't, like, scratch my nose without poking myself in the eye because I had no control over my perception, like my spatial awareness.
Mm-hmm.
And I was up at like 3 o'clock in the morning, and I was like, this sucks. This whole thing sucked. And is it going to continue to suck? Am I going to ever get to run a marathon again? Am I going to be able to do my job again? Like, it was, and I just was like, you know what? I think it's important that I allow myself to be scared. And my
Mm-hmm.
boyfriend's cat, like, climbed in my lap. This is a cool moment too. She climbed into my lap because, like, I think cats just know, they sense
They
energy, like,
do.
they really do. And she's usually like an antisocial cat, but she was like, I think Jamie needs a hug. So she climbed up in my lap, and I just held her, and I just started bawling, and I just let it
Mm.
all out. Like, I just allowed myself to say, this freaking sucks. And I hurt, and I didn't want this to happen. I don't know why this happened. And I'm trying to trust that it happened for a good reason, but it doesn't change the fact that it sucks. And I just cried. And then I let it all go. And when I felt like I was done crying, I took a few deep breaths and the cat hopped off my lap and I'm like, everything's going to be okay. So
I love that because it's like it goes back to what we were saying, like chaos and peace can be at the same time. Like this can really can suck at the same time, still happening for a reason. And I think a lot of people get so caught up in the power of positive thinking that they kind of internally don't allow themselves to feel. It's like, oh, I don't want to feel the negative thing because I don't want to attract more of that, and it's like, but you have these feelings whether you acknowledge them or not. Like they're gonna still be there affecting you, and the only way
mhm,
to kind of let them go and not affect you as much is to feel your way through them.
yeah,
You have to say, yeah, this freaking sucks. I don't like this. And I think what it also allows you to do, and maybe an important lesson that people like me need to learn sometimes, is that when you're able to admit that you're hurting, you're also finally able to say that you might need a little bit of help. You might be open to receiving, whether it's, monetarily or from a friend or just for the universe to come in and comfort you. I think that's something that, you know, one thing that I like about Christianity, because I take something from every spiritual practice I find, is the
yeah,
concept of Jesus as the comforter and the Holy Spirit as the comforter. And when you are willing to say, God, I need help. Like I'm not feeling well today. There's that feeling that people get where all of a sudden they start to feel sense of comfort. And this is personal to everyone. Some people are like, oh God, I need help, and like nothing ever comes. But for others who say they feel it, this is what they're feeling. They allow themselves to be comforted by the universe.
mhm,
And I don't say that in the sense that those who don't like aren't allowing themselves, like I don't want to paint that picture. Like no, there's a path and a belief system for everyone that will work. But in this framing, in this context, if I've had this experience myself, it's like, gosh, I really am not well. But then all of a sudden, the things that I need in order to feel better start to show up around me. Not like I
yeah,
asked for them. I wasn't even consciously trying to manifest them at that point. It's just like the universe knows what you need.
mhm.
Gisela, she shared with me a book that I have to read here soon called The Universe Has Your Back, and it talks a little bit about this and that the universe does really kind of want the best for you. It may not always appear how you would like it to, but the universe is there for you. And when you can feel your feelings and allow yourself to feel strong when you're strong and weak when you're weak, you're so honest to where the universe and people around you can give you what you actually need because you're allowing the need to be expressed.
I love that so much. And yes, 100%. Yeah, it's just it all goes back to the fact that we just need to be, and we need to be
Mm-hmm.
present and just go through the process and not resist things, because I think like that inability to feel your feelings and to admit that you're hurting, or then in turn to ask for help or to be open to receiving help, it just kind of ends up creating more resistance. And
Mm-hmm.
it's that big boulder. The boulder's in your way again. Whereas if you can just step back and be open to the idea that help could be there, and you are capable of receiving help and you're capable of asking for help, then you start to notice those little pathways, or people pop into your life who have exactly what you need to help you, or
Mm-hmm.
that sense of comfort. And it's that simple sense of comfort from the universe can pop in and let you know that everything's going to be okay.
Mm-hmm. And when you do that, it opens up the door to receiving more from the universe because what that sort of what that particular example allows you to do then is start to trust. A lot of times people who struggle with feeling their feelings, the issue isn't really the feelings. It's really deeper than that. They somewhere in their early childhood lost their sense of trust,
Mm,
and it usually has to do with the some people call it the mommy wound, some people call it other things, but really a lot of times it's internalized very early on in the first couple of years of life when the child realizes that their parent, their guardian, their caregiver can't possibly meet all their needs 100% of the time, and that they have to kind of at some level fend for themselves in the world. Um, and for children, that's very traumatic because they don't, to this point, they've been totally cared for. They've been in the spirit, then they've been in the womb, and then you've been there at every beck and call. And at some point, like they called and they cried, and you weren't there. Ah, I must not be good enough. Ah, I can't trust anyone. And that happens, and our infantile, unconscious minds that don't really understand anything kind of internalize these negative beliefs and kind of lack of trust, and it doesn't always manifest the same way, but usually it's there, and this is
Hmm.
what kind of starts to guide a lot of our actions. And sometimes it's either reinforced or negated by our parents as life goes on. So let's say that you have this sort of experience, because we all do, and then you have parents who don't kind of combat that by showing you love and allowing you to feel safe in new ways. Now instead they're constantly like, "Oh yeah, you gotta toughen up. This is the real world. Oh yeah, you gotta do this. You gotta do that," and like just nitpicking all the time, and trying to toughen you up so that you'll be ready for the world. And their whole thought is, "The world's cruel and hard, and I gotta make sure my kids are tough." You're gonna go through life thinking like that's how you're supposed to be, and you're gonna be grateful for all these things that you really actually didn't like, and subconsciously reinforce this idea that you can't trust anyone. And then
Hmm.
you get to the situation where you have no choice but to rely on someone else, and you just can't do it because you've never in your life, whether it's 20 years, 28 years, or 34 years, been allowed or encouraged to let anyone else do for you. And it's like that becomes the big lesson that you have to learn, and all of a sudden like it has to go and become something that's really big and totally rips out everything that you've believed yourself to be and believed everyone else to be and believed the world to work, just so that you can get this one new idea that will pivot you to be able to do everything else. And that's where it's like with your birth trauma, like it had to really wreck everything so that you can get something new. With my last relationship, like yes, it had to wreck every aspect of how I envisioned myself to be in order for me to get this new idea planted in the soil, in the
Yeah.
rubble.
And it seems like the universe will continue to do that until you open yourself up to all possibilities and release your preconceived notions and release the way that you were raised in these beliefs that have been ingrained in you so long. And I do feel like once you finally get there to where you just be and allow things to go as they are, you don't have to get wrecked anymore. Then just hard things happen that are like,
Yeah.
okay, can navigate this instead of, oh my gosh, this destroyed me.
Right, and it all goes back to the narrative. You know, when you
Mm-hmm.
get these experiences, you get the chance to recontextualize the narrative. And I'm reaching a space where personally, I'm like, I'm trying not to do that. Like we always ask, you know, what does this mean? What is it doing for me? What can I learn from this? I'm really reaching a space where I'm trying not to make anything mean anything.
Mm.
Like, and it's really hard as a writer because I always want to like, what was the hidden meaning in this? What can I find out? What did this mean to me? And it's becoming, you know, what am I making this mean? Because ultimately,
Mm.
when you reach new levels of perspective, you go back to the same thing and it means something entirely different. The exact same events, the exact same lessons can mean something entirely different based on your awareness. Like, oh, well, in that case, do I really need to make it mean anything or can it just be what it was and learn
Yeah.
various lessons from it over and over again? And this is where it kind of goes back to, you know, my post on Facebook where sometimes things are just hard, you know? Do we have to make things mean something? Does it have to be, oh, the devil's after me, oh, got demons on me, oh, witches are in the church, or does it have to be, oh, God's really trying to grow me this time, or the universe has this in store for me? It's like, yes, but also like maybe you're just on a harder path. Maybe you've just done something that intrinsically is difficult, you know, like for me last year, going to school full time. We all know full time university is challenging. This is why students go to school full time right after high school instead of going right into work and then doing it. We also know that entrepreneurship is difficult. What was I thinking being a full time entrepreneur and full time college student after, almost 10 years of not being in school? Thinking that should be easy. Like, no, my whole perspective was off on that. It didn't. Well, yes, I had to learn some important lessons, and yes, maybe the universe was trying to teach me, hey, yeah, chill on your expectations. At the same time, like, it's also equally true that that was also just a really hard fucking thing I was trying to do.
Yeah.
And maybe the big lesson here is like, stop trying to do hard things on top of hard things because that's gonna make you feel like you can't do anything.
And that's where our free will definitely comes into play.
Ta-da! Coming back full circle. So I
We did.
promised I would mention, what my views on free
Yes,
will
I was going to
versus fate.
ask you that. It's your turn now.
Yeah. Um. So I look at. So I have a very specific definition for me of destiny. Destiny to me is the inevitable outcome, the inevitable place that we will end up if based on the actions that we take now. The choices that we make now and continue to make will inevitably lead us somewhere. That is destiny. So, for example, if you were to stay in your current role as a holistic healer at your Phoenix Wellness Center, is that the right name for it?
You were right. The Phoenix
Thank
Holistic
you.
Wellness Center. Good
It
job.
is 100% guaranteed that you will continue seeing clients until the day that clients stop showing up. There's no questions about it. That will be your destiny.
Mm-hmm.
And that just, it's as simple as that. People are like, are you sure it's that simple? Like, yes, it's that simple. If you decide that you are no longer going to do that, well, part of your destiny is that you will no longer see clients in that space, but you will guaranteed do something else. If you become a traveler, then you will guaranteed have to let go of the idea of being stable somewhere consistently. So you see, the choices that we make create the outcomes, and this is what I consider to be destiny. Whatever we're doing will inevitably lead somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is different from what I consider to be fate or the universe's path for us. I do believe that we also have soul contracts and things that before we came into this earth, we agreed to experience or to learn. And that comes into the life path that we are set on. But here's the thing about free will is that sometimes we can do things that alter maybe not the path that we were supposed to go on, but our relationship to the path. Excuse me. So, for example, when we do things like magic and we start trying to manifest in different ways, we sometimes call into ourselves experiences that we were set to have, but before we were ready to have them. Sometimes we take ourselves off these paths. Sometimes we build up connections to different types of entities that can then veer us from our path and we get lost. We get stuck in the world. We get too much news and negative social media content, and we start to, our minds break down and we start doing things that we ought not to. You know, I think that for some people who say get lost in addiction, that might be the life experience that they set for themselves. But I also think that it could also very likely be true that they weren't supposed to get lost there. It's happened, and now the universe is going to use it. But whatever happened in their lives between them and their parents, our free will impacts what we actually then create for ourselves. So we're always in this co-creation with the universe and with God and with
Mm-hmm.
Source. Like God's doing one thing and we're doing one thing, and that's where you have to kind of be able to then surrender your will. So Aleister Crowley talks about um, and what you will, or and it harm none, you what you will. Do that's part of the we can read and it harm none, do what you will. And he
Mm-hmm.
talks about um, follow your will, do what thou wilt. He's not talking about just what you want. He's talking about aligning with your highest will, your soul's highest purpose. Now, people have various thoughts on Aleister Crowley and his form of magic, and whether or not it was good or not. But that concept of aligning to your highest will, into the universe, into source, when you align your human 3D will with your soul's will, all of a sudden the things that you want start to come to you because it fits. It fits. So you don't have to do
Mm-hmm.
the magic and the manifestation because you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. And in that sense, you start to follow your life purpose. You have to get in flow with what was fated for you. Um, but then there's also this concept of the universal flow that I kind of touch on with the Tao. So like
Mm-hmm.
it's all there. The universe is also already on its own path of growth and expansion, and we're a part of that. Whether we're here on Earth or on other planets and other galaxies and meeting other species from all around, like there's this. If we think about, there was the Big Bang. Well, why did it bang? We don't know exactly, but the hand that wrote it, according to the alchemist, only knows. And
Yep.
that's okay. I don't have to have the answers, but it's on a path that's going somewhere. It's doing something, and we are a part of that function of doing something. So there will be things that we run up against, and I like this example because there will be things that we run up against that may or may not directly have an impact on us, or rather a purpose for us specifically individually. And it may just be the fact that we live in a universe that's also already doing things. Case in point, a really small example of this. You go diving, you're in the ocean. There are fish that live in the ocean, there are sharks that live in the ocean, there are sea creatures, there are also currents. and they're all doing their own thing. The moment you step off your boat and into the water, you're in this environment and you're subject to things that can happen in this environment, regardless of whether you agree with it or not. If a shark shows up and bites your arm off, unfortunately, while you had the free will to not have to be in that area, and you may have manifested it by being there, at the same time, you know, sharks are biting in this particular part of the water. And that's just a function of that. It could be bad luck, it could be the universe trying to teach you a lesson, or it could just be that these things happen here. And that's okay too. Life is always happening around us. And so when I think about fate versus predestination and destiny versus free will, you know, I think we have free will in which we influence the things that we do and the outcomes that create that happen for us. And then there are things that we're supposed to be doing and things that we're supposed to experience. And then things that just happen because we all by virtue exist in a living, breathing, moving, changing world and universe. And so it's all true. And this is
Yes.
where we start to pull back and become enlightened. You start to see like all of these mechanisms are at work and it's all good.
Yeah.
You're going to do some things because you want to do it. You're going to do some things because your soul wanted to do it. Some things are going to happen to you because you need to learn it. Some things are going to happen just because they're happening and you're going to feel like it's happening to you. But really, if you pull back enough, you, and your neighbor are all having the same experience. For example, like a few years ago, 2018, it hailed in summer in Colorado. Terrible hailstorm. Like hail the size of my fist coming through.
Mm.
I went outside afterwards when it stopped to look at my car to make sure it wasn't destroyed. And lo and behold, dents all in the roof and back windshield blown out and glass everywhere. I'm like, ugh. But as I looked out across the rest of the parking lot, like most other cars were in the same condition. Front and back windshields cracked and glass everywhere and people coming out like, and all you could just hear was dudes like, my fucking car, and girls like, oh my god, just crying. Everyone crying. I'm like, we all just got waylaid with this massive storm. Like, by virtue, like, it wasn't just me. It didn't just happen to me. Like, I can't say why me. Like, my neighbor's car got wrecked even worse, and we all
Yeah.
just got hit. And that's because we happen to live in Colorado in a summer where we had this massive hailstorm with hail that was the size of fists.
Wow, what a perfect analogy. Yeah. And it's so easy to get caught up in situations like that where we forget, like, this is all happening to all of us,
Mm-hmm.
not just
Mm-hmm.
me. And how we choose to navigate that is up to the individual.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so like I know I talked a lot and like it was a complex sort of answer because I feel like people want simple answers to complex things. We want
Hmm.
simple answers to complex things, and of course we like to say if you can take a complex thing and explain it simply, then you got it. But like at some level, like this is I think for me as simple as it gets. There are multiple levels, and life just does what life does, and every aspect of life is going to do what it does. We are both nature and nurture. We're consciousness and unconsciousness. Like we're not separate from the system. Like we are the system
Yeah. We are the light and the dark at the same time. We are the
at the
gray
same
Jedi's.
time. And this is important. I think also I was having a conversation with vegans as well. And so there are vegans who think that it's purely completely unethical for humans to eat meat and animals. I'm not going to get into that whole discussion. But what I will say is that when you look at it, one of their arguments is that, you know, we shouldn't do it because we're above animals. But realistically, the question becomes are we really? Are we really? Because at the end of the day, other animals do not look at us that much different. Like they're not gonna say, "Oh, is that a human?" Nah, that's God stuff right there. I'm not going that way. It's not a it's a sin against nature and the universe. If I touch one of them, nah, people get their arms ripped off by sharks every year. They didn't think, oh, is that a human? Nah. Like, no,
Uh-huh.
we are a part of this kingdom here. Things happen. And, you know, whether or not one decides to eat meat or whatever, that's not the point. The point being here, we are not separate from the system like we like to think that we are. We create our walls in our cities and whatnot, and we think, how dare these animals show up in our space? These are nuisances. But in reality, like, we're all here on this planet coexisting.
Hmm.
And some animals would do some crappy things to other animals, you know? Baby sharks, if there are too many of them, they cannibalize each other. Octopus, when they hatch, they eat their parent. Some pretty jacked up sounding stuff.
Yeah.
We're not that immune to these types of horrors of nature. And they say, oh well, that's just the natural world, but we're not natural. I don't know. This earth, this body feels pretty natural to me.
Feels pretty real to me. Yeah, that's a really good way of looking at it. And it just goes to show like the different perspectives too. It's like, yeah, there's a lot of really crazy things happening in the natural world that we think we're above all that. And it's like, we're not. We're all having this experience together. We're all ripping each other's arms off too. Like
it really is. And I mean, if we look at the world as it actually is versus how we think it should be, or how we like to think that it is, and that these bad things are only tragedies that happen once every now and again, like, no, like there's stuff happening nonstop around the clock across the globe, good and bad. Like we can't just
mm-hmm.
focus on the bad things that are happening. Like, no, there are great things happening. Somewhere in the world, a baby's being born and being cared for. At the same time, somewhere in the world, a baby's being born and being tossed or forced to live in squalor, and people are
Yeah.
starving. And these are all happening. And I'm not going to say, what do we do about it? But can we acknowledge that both realities are true,
Mm-hmm.
and that, at least within our immediate spheres, we have a choice to do whatever feels right moment to moment, and as we're able.
Yes, 100%. And as you mentioned too, if you get caught up in the way you think the world should be, the world is pretty hard and pretty awful. And I noticed that a lot with people, that they have this idea of this is how the world is supposed to be. And it's not. But if you
Mm-hmm.
just go with the flow and say this is how the world is, how am I going to make choices to coexist within it? Then the world's not so bad. And
It's really
yeah,
not, it's not the world that has problems. It's people in the world who have problems that they then share with other people, and then other people that think that they have problems. Like, no, we got some problems, but we can fix ourselves.
mm-hmm.
The world doesn't have problems. The world, if you think you're going to change the whole world, first of all, no. But can you change yourself in the world? Sure. Can you then go out and live in such a way that your life might inspire someone else to deal with their life a little bit differently? Sure. But if you make that the goal and, yeah, the vision of success, you might be very disappointed because you're basing your happiness and self-worth off of convincing other people to change. Mm-mm. Really, you just go and you live and you love people and you love nature, you love the world in the best way that you can, accept things as they are, and you stand up against things that can't be accepted. There are some things that, we really should not tolerate on our planet, and that's
Mm-hmm.
okay too. But at the end of the day, we also all won't agree on what those things are. But what we can
Exactly.
agree on is that we all we all want food, water, shelter, basics. We all want to have the freedom to live in a way that's fun and free to us. We all want to have our partners and love how we want, and for some people, fuck how they want. um, we all want to feel like we are happy and comfortable and safe and free. These handful of things that we want without being imposed on, without being taxed to death. Like, these are things that we can all say that we want. The only difference is what we believe is the best way to go about it. Some believe that the only way to go about it is through this particular religion, and the only way to adhere to this religion is to make everyone else believe this religion too.
Mm-hmm.
That by default puts you in opposition to other people who will say, hey, I'm not about religion. So, how do we reconcile that? Well, we have to go back to
Right.
the basics. Well, what do you want and what do I want? Can you have what you want without imposing what you think life should be on me? As long as I don't impose my harm and will on you? Like, my belief in me, like, two men getting married doesn't hurt anyone else. But why do
Mm-hmm.
we think it does? Someone deciding that they're going to be, or not even deciding, but recognizing their gender identity and sexual identity as something other than what we expected, for the most part, does not harm any of us. Granted, there are things around that make it more complicated politically and potentially in forms of safety for certain people. But those are the things we should be looking at, not whether or not they are their existence is going to harm us. Like someone else's existence is not going to harm me unless they're going out like on an intentional mission to harm me.
Exactly.
So far as I can see, on a kind of semi-political rant here, I'm sorry, there
That's
is
okay.
more harm to people who identify as trans than there is the other way around, and that's just by sheer numbers. If you look at the facts, their existence has tended to lead to more towards violence towards them from people who are uncomfortable with their lifestyle, more than any cases of people dressing up as women and going sneaking in bathrooms and causing harm to women, utilizing that excuse. In fact, we have more cases of openly cisgendered heterosexual men causing more harm to women than we do of supposedly trans women towards women. So the question becomes, what is this really about in that political sense? And I think if we start to pull back the layers here and recognize the world is what it is, people are what they are, we start to unravel all this political stuff and say, hey, people are out here trying to do futile things. We can make life much
Mm-hmm.
simpler, and that gives me hope. And you have to choose hope. You have to choose hope. Sometimes you'll look at this thing and think, God, people are so dumb. I hate this planet, and you'll feel that, and that's okay.
Yeah.
But then you get through it, like, well, the fact that I can see it, I know I'm not the only one who sees this. I know it is
Hmm.
numerically impossible for me to be the only one who sees this. So you know what? It's I. More people will get this straight.
100%. And it just goes back to you stay focused on your perspective. What can you do in the moment? And that's your
Mm-hmm.
free will to choose how you respond to the circumstances that are happening around you because you dove into this water. If you're going to be swimming in this water, you have to accept that there's sharks.
Oh, yes. And I know I've been talking your ear off, so I just want to say thank you for the space. Thank you
You're
for the
welcome.
openness and for listening. Like, I did not intend to do all that.
Just like you didn't intend to write Facing Racism, but here you are.
Yeah.
You
Sometimes the
have a
universe has
message to
things to say.
share. Yep. You have a message to share and it needs to be heard. And I am very grateful that you joined me today. I knew that our podcast conversation was going to be awesome. And that's exactly what it was. I've been looking forward to this for, well, how long have I known you now? Well over a year, maybe
Has it
two.
been that long already? Oh my
I,
goodness.
I think it's been 2 years because I published the Transcendent back into 2020 and you helped me with the cover. So it's been a minute.
Right.
And I'm like, I'm going to have this guy on my podcast and we're going to have an amazing conversation. So thank you. I'm so glad you're here. And this has been awesome.
It really has been. Thank you for having me. I'm super excited, and I look forward to doing this again when I maybe get my own podcast up and running, which has been
Hey,
in the back of my head. You'll have to be one of my guests.
I would be glad to. Well, I think we're at a good stopping point to wrap this up. So thank you again, Andre. For all you guys who want to follow Andre on social media or check out his books, you want to share like where everyone can find you at? And I'll also put it in the description below.
Absolutely. The easiest way to connect with me is on Instagram at author author dot Andre Andrae Smith Smith. You can also find me on Facebook at Andrae Smith Jr. The picture should be pretty similar to my Instagram one. But those would be the two easiest ways. If you find my Instagram, you'll find my Facebook.
Sounds great. And then you've got Facing Racism as well as write your book in no time.
That's correct. Both of which are available on Amazon right now. And like I mentioned earlier, I'll be re-releasing a second edition of Facing Racism later on this year with some updates and some cool new additions. So it'll be fun.
That's awesome. I'm sure it's going to be great. All right. Well, thanks again, Andre. And thanks everybody for listening. And we'll see you next time.
See you next time.
Bye.
Bye.